Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you're located. I am Danielle McNally. I'm the executive editor of Marie Claire Magazine, and I'm honored to be here moderating this panel on the future of menstrual equity. Again, thank you for joining us and giving us your time today. And a special thank you to Megha Desai and her team at the Desai Foundation for organizing this and bringing us all together for what I'm sure will be a very interesting, educational, and inspiring discussion. And before we dive in, I'll pass it over to Megha to say a few words about the foundation and its work.
Hi, friends. Thank you so much, Danielle, and thanks everyone for being here. The Desai Foundation empowers women and children through community programming to elevate health, livelihood, and menstrual equity. And we've been doing this in rural India for over 25 years. And menstrual equity has really become the cornerstone program that we believe has a long-term, lifelong effect on the outcome of a young bleeder's life. And one of the things that we started to do was try to break around the stigmas around menstruation. So we started the Pledge Your Period campaign about 7 years ago, which was designed to really encourage folks to speak loudly and proudly about their menstruation and their experiences and learn more about what's happening. It's a social media campaign where you can take a pledge. And we love to couch that with a discussion so that we can get kind of deeper into what it is that we all need to do and how can we all do better to really change the future of menstrual equity. And so I'm so grateful for all the incredible panel members, for all of you that are watching. If you want to learn more about the Pledge Your Period campaign, you can click the link, pledgeyourperiod.com, and also visit us at thedesaifoundation.org. Back to you, Danielle. Thank you.
Thank you, Megha. Now let me introduce to you all our esteemed panelists who are joining us this morning. Of course, you just heard from Megha Desai, the president of the Desai Foundation. We also have Jennifer Weiss-Wolf, who is an author, the co-founder of Period Equity, and a fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law. We have Dr. Charis Chambers, who is an OBGYN, and you may know her as the Period Doctor on social media. We have Kylar Broadus. He is an activist, attorney, and a Black man of trans experience. And Kay Cannon, a director, writer, and producer. So thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their expertise and their insight with us today. I know that so many of us here today have been passionate about the topics of menstrual hygiene and menstrual equity for a very long time, but it does seem like this particular moment is a rather good time to be having this discussion. It seems we're in the 2 steps back portion of our forward progress. Jennifer, you and I, for example, first met and developed an anti-tampon tax petition, I believe it was 8 years ago. And in that time, many states and municipalities have changed their laws to remove the sales tax from menstrual products. But now here we are, with period tracker apps being used against women or bleeders who seek out or have an abortion. We have the Don't Say Period law making its way through the Florida legislative system. So I want to open this discussion by talking a little bit about policy and government action. So Jennifer, I'll start with you. Can you take a moment to explain the policies that have been attacking menstruators and how this legislation hinders bleeders' health and safety and their growth and self-esteem?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And it's really great to be here with new friends and prior. As you mentioned, Danielle, it's true. It was 2015 when we first met in New York Cosmopolitan magazine at the time. And it was actually a real thrill to be kind of newly considering what a policy agenda could look like that embraced and elevated and centered menstruation. That had never been done before in this country. It had barely actually been done before globally. There were places that were far ahead of the United States in terms of the way they thought about menstruation, whether it was through innovation or through advocacy or through activism, and through public policy and public directives. But there really just, it had never been made a central tenet of what our policy making could look like. And it was really exciting at the time. I mean, I remember taking it back to 2015, that there were here at home in the United States, a lot of efforts suddenly through some early media coverage. And I know we'll be talking about media and public presentation in a little bit, but because of that public and positive media attention in 2015, people were getting engaged in this idea that our policies should follow or our policies should lead was novel. And I remember at the time imagining and envisioning that there really could be bipartisan buy-in for it. That was where this phrase menstrual equity emerged. It wasn't just sort of an accidental phrase or a surprise movement generator. There were other ways that this was being talked about globally, whether through the lens of water, sanitation, and hygiene, whether as human rights, whether as public health crises. And while all of those were true, I really thought about equity as a guiding principle that could bring both sides of the aisle along, whether it was equitable participation in one's education, in the economy, in civic life. So that was very purposeful. And I was probably one of the few people that wasn't surprised that this was an agenda that had bipartisan buy-in, that as many quote unquote red states as blue states were willing to tackle issues like sales tax on menstrual products or the free distribution of menstrual products in public facilities, whether they were schools, whether they were corrections, whether they were detention, whether they were emergency services. And interestingly, even as we sort of forged through the Trump years, the agenda remained quite high on people's radar. It was something that was achievable. It was something that in some ways lacked some of the discord and toxic partisanship that have plagued other issues. So we plowed ahead, and as you know, there's some statistics to follow about the number of states that have mandated now menstrual product provision or more affordable menstrual products or less discrimination or discriminatory practice in the distribution of menstrual products. So all of that was a really positive laying of groundwork. I suppose at some level I imagined or knew that it wasn't, that our politics were too complicated to sustain that. But what's happened now is actually much worse than I might have imagined, because it's such a broad and horrific attack on our very being, on our individuality, on inclusivity, on our entire lives that have taken over certainly one of our political parties. And menstruation has absolutely become part of that narrative. I know I've gone on for a long time, but I sort of wanted to set the stage at least for the answer, which is to say that I guess it's not a surprise that in this current political landscape of anti-wokeness, and I'm doing air quotes there, and all of the ways our bodies are under attack, that menstruation would follow. So you gave some examples, and I'm sure we'll talk about them as the panel goes on. But menstruation has absolutely become part of the talking points and lines of attack that are present in our entire political system right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unfortunate that we're seeing this regression. Megha, I want to bring you into the conversation at this point. Of course, your foundation's work is primarily in India, and I'm interested to know, considering what's transpiring in America at the moment, sort of how you might compare and contrast the experiences in India versus the United States, where Americans like to see themselves as perhaps more forward thinking or more advanced. And I think there's a lot that we can learn about this menstrual equity journey from the work you're doing in India and perhaps vice versa.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jen, for that beautiful frame setting, because I think that was really important for all that we're discussing today. We started working in menstrual equity 15 years ago because we felt like it was really the avenue into the two areas that we were trying to support, which was health and livelihood in rural communities. And every time we would, start doing something in the education realm, we were like, where are the little girls? And it's because there is no bathrooms and there's no this and there's no like a litany of other issues, right? They aren't allowed to stay in school. There are all these stigmas and barriers. And then same was happening at school. I mean, at work, the workplace, right? So they were being trained in something and then they wouldn't have appropriate facilities in the place of work or wouldn't have access to comfortable materials. Or, and this is really the biggest portion of it, is they just simply didn't have the education and the information that they needed to properly manage their periods. And for the last 15 years, I've been going out into the field, having conversations in a variety of different native tongues and really listening to the barriers that these women are facing. Just last January or February, I was sitting in a village doing a very choreographed presentation of our work to Secretary Clinton, who came to visit our village and our work. And even in this moment, we do a moment where we ask people to raise their hands and tell us about a stigma or a barrier or something that's holding them back. And I heard yet a brand new horrifying stigma where these women in these farming villages were being told that if they saw snakes while they were bleeding, they were going to curse their entire family. They live in farms. It's impossible for them to not see snakes. So it's almost these things that are setting people up for failure so that they feel shame and horror. And though we are making some progress in urban areas, we aren't making progress in rural areas. And that education, that access to water, that access to materials, products, et cetera, is still a huge, huge gap. One of the reasons why I was so interested in having a conversation about the intersection of what's happening here in the US and what's happening in India is that we have seen firsthand what some of these barriers do to women and to bleeders and to men, everyone, bleeders and non-bleeders alike, because actually what it does is it holds the entire society back. It holds back the GDP of a nation, frankly, if women and men and bleeders and non-bleeders don't have the information that is required to properly support those that bleed in their menstrual journey. And so suddenly seeing things like data tracking and, don't say period and all these other bills. Well, I see what a society looks like when those types of rules are applied. And I can tell you, it is one where the entire society is held back. And so these laws are a big red herring for me, and they've been freaking me out. And poor Jen and I, we've been on the phone a lot over the last 2 months and really just trying to figure out like what, how, when, luckily she has a much stronger understanding of the law here than I do. And so that to me is kind of where I see the intersection, use me as the canary in the coal mine where like, I've seen how bad this can get. And so I'll pause there.
Yes, that's, a great place for me to bring in Dr. Chambers, I think, in fact, because Mega, you have noted that education piece is really probably the most important and the heart of this issue. So Dr. Chambers, I know that you work to educate your patients, you work to educate so many people on social media. What are some of the obstacles to menstrual health literacy and education that you see in your practice and on your social media channels? And then once building on that, what strategies do you think that we can employ to foster, more open and positive and inclusive discussions around menstruation? Because I think if we're not talking about it, we of course can't be educated on it.
So Danielle, thank you for that question. Again, this is my heart. I have a uterus behind me. Like this is what I do. So I think one of the biggest barriers that I see is the confusion that not talking about periods and menstruation somehow is an act of protection or preservation, which is absolutely untrue. And so what you're seeing is parents often, or even, superintendents or principals desiring to protect this population, but doing so in a way that is completely counterintuitive to their goals. And so what I like to do in those scenarios is just lay out some facts. And facts are beautiful because you can't argue with them. You can try, but you shouldn't. And so I just say, about 44% of girls have their first period and have no idea what's going on. 60% are terrified. It's even higher in India. 77% of girls have no idea what is going on when their first period occurs. Does that make you feel powerful? And just asking the parent, anyone, does it make you feel powerful when your body does something you have no idea what's going on? Anybody in their right mind would say no. Do you feel better when you're prepared for situations that are difficult or spontaneous? Yes. And so just unpacking those human feelings, it to me helps to kind of break down those walls, right? It's so much easier. It is so much easier to make these blanket statements to say, we just don't talk about periods. We'll just make it the age of 12. But critical thinking is what allows us to truly provide equity. Equity is, what does this person need? Not what does everyone need. It is, what does this specific person need to be their best self? And that is customized, that is unique. It needs to be culturally sensitive. It needs to be inclusive. There's so many things that need to occur to really serve each person well. And so that is the work that I try to do. I try to serve each person well. And what I know is that knowledge serves people well. That is something that is not changing. Knowledge is still power. And so just like Mega mentioned, the idea of the misconception of if I see a snake, my family is cursed. The misconceptions are abundant. We will never be able to keep up with every misconception, but the truth, facts, science, that can be our guiding light, right? And so if someone says, hey, if you don't have a period, you're building up toxins in your body and you're going to die. That's an easy one for me to combat. I'm like, okay, we take out a uterus. Do they die? Do we have to do a uterine transplant? Is there some womb dialysis? No, because it is not a detoxifying organ. And so you just have to appeal to logic. And oftentimes I'm asking questions, but it is a conversation in which you have to have courage, and you have to have compassion and sensitivity to people's lived experiences. You cannot connect with someone by beating them down, by dismissing what they have been taught by the people they love in their lives. And you say, you know what? I think that maybe someone's correlating this to this, but let me tell you about the science. And then you get to decide. And so that is my whole approach. I think it has to be customized. It has to be culturally sensitive, and it has to be based on education.
Thank you for that. I am energized by all of your comments and your insight there. Of course, the discussion already around menstruation is so limited, but a sorrowful truth in that is that the trans experience in menstruation is often silenced and not brought up at all. Kylar, would you be able to tell us a little bit and discuss with us the intersection of trans rights and menstrual equity, and where you see the faults and hopefully some places we can go in a positive direction to increase equity for menstrual products, literacy, and resources for trans individuals?
Well, I think we have to realize that one, functions don't define who a person is. And I think that's a big one. And so there are lots of trans people that have menstrual cycles. Some of them look like me. I was fortunate enough, I had plenty of problems early on. Some of them that Dr. Chambers talks about that happened in the United States. I'm honored to be here with Desai and the work they do in foreign countries, but lots of it goes on in this country. The counting of the periods. I was appalled as a trans child to be traumatized by that in my physical education class and going, what? Why do you know when my period is? And what has this got to do with anything? And that just further traumatized me and put me in a closet. And I think that's what happens to lots of trans people, whatever they turn out looking like, because we need to expand what trans people look like to other people. And we need to not judge and stereotype. And then I'm going to quote Dr. Chambers on this. we need to go with the medicine. The science has proved it. I've been along that journey to help science prove it, and I'm not tooting my own horn. I've just done that work to make sure science has proved we exist, and on and on and on, because of the traumatizations that I've experienced and don't want others to experience. So I think we have to stop looking for people in a box that look a certain way, and we have to open up our eyes and go to the medicine and see that there are lots of people that look different ways that experience menstrual cycles and experiences. And I do think, and to go back to what, I don't know, I want to call you Miss Desai, said earlier about us not categorizing people or lumping them in some kind of box, because there's all sorts of trans people that look various ways that have menstrual cycles. So we cannot do that. We must provide support and understanding. And this project amazes me, and I'm glad it's doing the work it's doing, because we have all this legislation across the country that is attacking trans people and don't realize that the multitude of issues, including menstrual cycles, are one of the things that trans people have to deal with. And so we need to provide more doctors that understand that. We need to provide quality care and products that service trans people and their body parts. And all of those things are very important. And I'll rest there if you have more questions for me, but there's lots of room here. There's lots to talk about. And I'm very excited to be on this panel. You know, I feel like I was meant to be on this panel. And I think this is very important that we talk about. And all of these don't say anything bills, when the reality is this is the reality of people's lives that leaves them nowhere outside of the world or the community, and increases suicide rates. And that's what it does. And I get those calls daily, and I don't care from where in the world, I take them. And that's what I have always done. And I don't care what culture, where they're from. My job is to save lives.
I love that. Can I butt in real quick, because Kylar just touched on something so important?
Of course.
I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but one of the first ever suicide hotlines in America was started because a young bleeder started bleeding, didn't know what it was, thought she was being punished by God, and killed herself. And a doctor started one of the first suicide hotlines in this country because of menstruation. And so it is just a critical, like, those two are so deeply linked. And I just thank you, Kylar, for bringing that up. I just wanted to butt in. I'm sorry.
It's okay, because you know what? I didn't know why I was bleeding either. And you just hit my heart. And that's why I do the work, because it's about saving lives for me and explaining and being there for people. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, both of you. And Kylar, I will be coming back to you certainly later in the discussion for more of your insight. For a moment, I want to turn it to Kay, because I think with these discussions being banned at school, certainly much of the education around menstruation is going to have to happen through pop culture. That is where young people get much of their education about the world today, rightfully or wrongfully. And as we know, sometimes Hollywood gets it right, and sometimes they don't. I'm very excited by the new feature film, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I think that was a transformative book for myself as a young girl, learning about puberty. On the flip side, Meg and I were discussing on Friday that the recent Sex and the City spinoff, and Just Like That, had a really regressive portrayal of getting your first period. So what would you say, you know, as a person working in Hollywood, what can the media do to contribute to this menstrual narrative that's happening right now, and to change the negativity around it?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say how
absolutely honored I am to be here. I feel like bow down to all of you here because I'm a comedy person. So I feel like I'm like the jokester on the side while you guys are doing very serious work. So I just want to say that how grateful I am to be here. And that nothing is scarier than an educated, self-possessed bleeder. And so I think that, you know, one of the things, again, I do comedy. So one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this is because I find that when you make people laugh, they don't realize that they're actually learning something. So you can, you know, do jokes about something where they're like, oh, that's great. And then go, oh, that was a gay couple that I actually loved. And now I know their story. So for what I do and creatives do to put it out there is to help teach and help educate. And we do it through entertainment where it's almost like a magic trick. And so it's frustrating when you do see it done wrong. And I think a big part of what we need to do moving forward is to have creatives who have firsthand experience on this. You know, like when I look back at like, I'm going to shout out a comedy I really loved a lot, but Superbad, for example, did a whole thing about a girl having her period. And it was like, ooh, oh, girl. It was so gross that it caused like what we would call a set piece where the whole thing was around how we saw blood. And I was so angry over that because it just, you know, creates that stigma of like, that is gross, this very natural thing that nothing could be worse than seeing blood in public from something that's very, you know, very natural. So I think the goal moving forward is to have creatives who have, I think things have changed. That was a long time ago. But I think moving forward, it's about dealing with facts, making what you like, talking about it. And this goes all the way to the end. Like, you know, I'm shocked at how little we talk about being perimenopausal and on our way out and the lack of education with that, and women not talking to other, or, you know, bleeders not talking to other bleeders and going like, what's happening to my body? And, you know, not you, Dr. Chambers, but doctors not knowing how to address this, and also not putting enough money into, you know, research and caring. There's a lack of care. So what's so great about, you know, like you live by the sword, die by the sword, but really it is great to have social media and to have a way to talk about this and get it out there in ways, because you know, I'm not surprised it was bipartisan until they could find a way to make it so that they could control it, right? You know, and use it as a way to hold bleeders back.
Very well said. And I think you're so right that comedy, laughter is a universal language. So hopefully we can touch on that a little bit. Dr. Chambers, I'm going to come back to you really quickly before we move off of this education piece. You know, so you've developed some really compelling content. What broadly can, you know, if there are entrepreneurs on this call, if there are teachers on this call, if there are just parents on this call, like what can we all do to improve the menstrual equity and menstrual hygiene conversation and education piece in our own communities, in our own households? What would you suggest that the average person does to kind of help broaden this education piece?
So my basic tenets are earlier is better, and this is an everyone topic. This is not some niche topic. This affects every single person. So for one, I think that we should be brave enough to have these conversations early. And for parents, that means you get the education because you need to be guiding your child through this. But that's not so different from what a parent is supposed to do. You are charged with guiding your child through life so that they can be a functional adult. That is literally your whole calling, your task, right? And so the idea that parents are like, well, what do I do? I'm not saying that you have to have all of the pieces, but you need to be the one who's looking for these resources, like an event like this, my YouTube page. Like there's a variety of places in which people are doing the work. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to affect change, you absolutely can. Anyone with a voice can, and that's the beauty of social media. I mean, anyone with a following, with someone who they can talk to and influence, every single person in every aspect of their life can make a difference in this conversation. We must include our boys. We must include everyone in this conversation. The very fact that we are separated in sixth grade and the boys are allowed to play or do whatever they do while we're told, this thing may or may not be happening with like minimal details by your social studies teacher, like not even an accurate source of information, is the most absurd thing ever. The truth of the matter is, if we can make this a broader conversation, that's how we truly affect change. Teaching one menstruator in silo, in isolation, then just sends them home to face their mother or grandmother or partner or someone who hasn't had that conversation. And so it almost kind of creates bigger barriers because we're just creating a larger chasm between how they are and what they feel and the people that love them and are supposed to be their support system. So if we can include other folks in this conversation, the way society is changing and families are progressing and dynamics are different, everyone needs to be a part of this conversation. We fail when we just try to identify the little girls. The issue is we're missing some non-binary folk, we're missing some trans folk in that conversation, and they are very much so capable of menstruating. And so those things drive me insane. It is beautiful enough that I'm able to kind of align that with passion because I would just lose it in the other way. So what I mean to say is if you are angered, if you are triggered, if you are bothered by this, this just might be your calling. And you need to pay attention to that. No matter what you do, whatever your space is, you can affect change and just make sure you're pushing the needle in the right direction.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of someone who determined this is their calling, I'm going to jump back to Jennifer here for a moment and ask, from the policy standpoint, I mean, what this conversation is bringing up for me right now is that mention of the very separatist health class, where you're perhaps just, maybe you're learning what actually happens to your body, or maybe they're just telling you, so be abstinent and you never have to worry about any of this. Are there policies that we can try to put in place, Jennifer, to improve our health education, our textbooks? There is a very negative policy in Florida, the Don't Say Period bill, but maybe give us some context of what that bill is doing. And then also, if you have heard of any positive policies out there in this health education space, enlighten us to those, or if not, what would you hope comes up in this space?
Well, I mean, so I'm going to actually take it back just like a step before answering it, because the policy arena is it's tricky for so many reasons. And in many ways, when you're doing public policy, you do have to settle for good. And sometimes, perfect becomes, something that you have to figure out where you're going to land. So I'm going to start by just talking about what some of the menstrual policies have been and whether they're good or perfect or something in between. We could put a pin in that. But they also lend themselves to understanding what some of the other barriers to reasonable policy are going to be around things like education and awareness and information. So if we start with just sort of what the core menstrual policy agenda has looked like in this country for 8 years now, and it's really the first time it's ever happened. So that is the context of what we're looking. It's been a combination of proposals that would use public funding to ensure the availability largely of menstrual products or the affordability of menstrual products. It hasn't gone much deeper than that. I know that we all on this Zoom and in this discussion feel very strongly that that's sort of the tip of the iceberg. That's barely enough to actually affect real change, but it's probably the only thing that, at least for this period of time, I think that our lawmakers could be even relied upon to do. And they didn't even do that. You know what I mean? Like there's still, even though there's been success in that, every state in this country has actually introduced some piece of legislation focused on menstruation. it's, I think we all agree that it's pretty insufficient stuff. The other thing that becomes sort of insufficient about the story, and has been my experience of being an advocate, is learning how little our lawmakers know about menstruation, and the things that they still believe, the biases that they still carry, the weird social, aspects of it that they haven't broken through. The fact that for some lawmakers, it was actually really hard to have these conversations or debates. This flew up against something in them that, anyway. So putting a pin in all of that, what is possible, or where do we stand with legislation and public policy around inclusive sex ed, around inclusive health, features. We have a really, really long way to go. And it's lately been evidenced in the way that menstruation has played out, not just around sort of basic bills that would make menstrual products affordable or available, but the example of this Florida legislation that was it was a piece of regressive sex ed legislation. Quite frankly, I'm sure the writer of this bill didn't even think about menstruation when it was introduced. I don't actually think he had some nefarious "don't say periods" thing on his mind. He didn't even know enough to think about it. And then when he was asked about it by a fellow legislator, of course, his ignorant knee-jerk response with the question was, because it was a bill that forbade teaching any sort of sex ed to kids before sixth grade, the response was, does that mean kids in fourth and fifth grade can't talk about their periods with a teacher, with a nurse, with each other? And his knee-jerk answer was, yeah, because it also didn't occur to him what that even meant, right? So we're talking about like ignorance on top of, bad intentions. It's pretty bad. So the idea that we can get forward movement in state legislatures, is something that I don't put a lot of stock in. I've actually started thinking about what it would. We'll also just put a pin in the notion that sex ed isn't even required by states. It's not required to be medically accurate. If you can imagine, like, those are real words. It's not, we can teach it and it doesn't have to be medically accurate. Okay, so with all of that as our reality, I've started the wheels are turning on what the workarounds could be. I don't have any faith in going to our state legislatures, especially at this point in time, when we have anti-democracy initiatives shaping those state legislatures, that they are gerrymandered into a form that they are not representative. I don't want to actually give them the responsibility because I don't trust them. So I've actually started thinking about what the workarounds can be to inject sex ed and menstruation related education into our lives that don't require having to go through local school boards and state school boards. So I'll just throw one idea out there and then we can move on. And if folks have a response to it, I'm curious to hear it. But this came actually in response to the period tracking app chaos also around the Dobbs decision, when people were recommended by experts on Twitter to delete their period tracking apps because they were collecting data that could potentially be harmful in a society where pregnancy outcomes are and can be widely criminalized. While I agree that that data is problematic and something that people need to be very aware of what they're doing when they share that kind of information with a company or on the internet, it's the lack of education and the need to find that kind of guidance that's driving the millions of people who use those apps. So given that we are existing in this state where education is at a premium and and is hard to come by, and we can't trust or we can't rely on the democratic process that the people in leadership are going to actually give us the information we need to counter the laws they're passing that harm us, that there have to be some workarounds. One of them, unfortunately, it is government still. Sorry, it's what I do. But I've considered what it would look like to tap agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, for example, which, because of an ability to pass legislation to improve transparency around the consumer production of menstrual products, you might know that when you open a box of tampons, there's information there about toxic, it's always so hard to say, shock syndrome. And that was a workaround, because we don't have laws that mandate better and healthier and safer production and information that we're allowed to receive about as consumers. So that was what the sort of, the halfway mark was. Well, why can't we do that for information around menstruation and information about early pregnancy and information about how weeks of pregnancy are counted and information that will actually be life-saving to people in this era that we're living in? People always say to me, well, do people really read that stuff? And I always say, well, how do you know anything about toxic shock? The only reason any of us, for the good doctor, know anything about it is because it's on the box. So anyway, these are things that I started thinking about. I know this was sort of a non-linear answer, but I do still have faith in democracy and in public policy as part of our salvation, because it is how you can reach the greater good. But knowing what the real detriments and deficits are in our current system, I'm trying to think creatively about ways to ensure people get information that they need, and bypassing people like Stan McClain, the good representative from the state of Florida, who didn't think that kids before the age of 6th grade need to be able to learn about periods.
Yes. I love that workaround so much. Let's get talking with the FDA, see what else we can put on there. I'll also say, as a person who was obsessed with magazines so much as a teen that I made that my life's pursuit, I learned a lot from YM and Teen and 17. And I think as much as we can, most of those are no longer in existence in print, but they exist on TikTok or websites and things like that. So a shout out to people who do journalism for young people, because I really learned a lot from those that I didn't learn at school, that I didn't learn from my family. So just a little shout for the media there. I do though want to come back to you, Mega, to talk about how this lack of education leads to all the stigma that we've heard a little bit about so far, but we haven't really dug into the stigma yet and what that can do to young leaders. So I would love for you to talk a bit about what you've seen in India with that lack of education. And then I think we can hear from some of the other panelists too on how they see that stigma impacting their communities here in the States. Oh, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. I'm going to start by telling a personal story, because I think that it just helps remind us that this happens everywhere. So I grew up, I'm Indian American. So my parents are immigrants, and but I went to the American, public school system in Massachusetts. And my family believes that you are not allowed to pray when you are bleeding. And it was hard enough being a bicultural, bilingual Hindu kid in a Catholic white town, where I was already walking this fine line of trying to be as white as I could to fit in, and then as Indian as I could to honor my heritage and, speak. I was already walking this fine line. And then everyone around me was very Catholic, and weirdly, despite me not believing in the faith personally, because I'm Hindu, I felt left out, right? Like there were like friend circles that were happening at CCD on Wednesdays, and I was like, oh, so I'm struggling with connecting with my faith, and now suddenly someone's telling me that I can't, like I'm undeserving of God's love 5 days a month because I do something that is natural. And I remember just having
healthy
and having this argument with my family, just like, and weirdly, the women in my family, none of the men in my family believed this. It was the women in my family that were very heavy-handedly forcing me to observe this tradition. And I wouldn't buy it. And it was very difficult to me. I was like, this is when I need God's love the most. What are you talking about? Like, this makes no sense to me. And the reason I tell this story is because how many different aspects of my life did that impact, right? It made me feel shame at school. It made my friendships difficult. It has had a long lasting impact on my relationship with my religion. And so I think my piece is basically about how this isn't something that just impacts a young bleeder's health, access to this one thing called menstruation, but this long lasting impact. I mean, the number of people that miss school days, that miss work days, that can't stay employed, that aren't allowed in their kitchens, that have, I mean, during the pandemic, we saw so many things of shame going up the roof because people were not around their brothers and their fathers and their non-menstruators, you know, for this many hours in a day. And so suddenly their shame went up in terms of hiding their periods and feeling like they had to do something. And this happened everywhere. This happened in India. This happened in America. And I think for me, one of the reasons why we're so passionate about having these public conversations, having campaigns like Pledge Your Period, having the work that we do, and just like we speak very openly with all the other menstrual health organizations. We all are quite connected, know one another, support one another, and so it's why I'm so passionate about this issue. It's not an issue that's just isolated in one area of a young bleeder's experience, and so it's this very multifaceted, mental health, physical health, education, job opportunities, poverty. And there aren't that many issues that are so wide-spanningly connected. And so it's something that somehow is so strange to me that it's such a massive horizontal issue, yet there are only these slivers of people that actually have the courage to talk about it. And that is the thing that we're really trying to change.
Thank you for sharing that personal experience. And I know we've talked so far about a lot of stigmas that would impact women and girls specifically. Kylar, I want to bring you in. I don't expect you to speak for all men or all people of trans experience, but of course these stigmas impact men and trans people and non-binary people as well. And I'm wondering if you can share some of your lived experience, what the negative stigmas that you see in that community are, and how we can fight against them and how we can reduce those stigmas.
Well, wow from Mega on that, because I feel that story so deeply. And, I've known who I was since I can remember a beginning of time. So when this thing happened to me, I was just aghast. And I have to share the personal part of it, which is so similar to Mega's story in sense, because there was all this shame around it. And it's like, what is this? What is this about? And then all the shame attached to it, because I had, fibromyalgia, all the stuff going on. So yeah, I can speak to my truth, although I work with enough people to know their truth. And the thing about being trans is you're not accepted for being trans or non-binary, number one. So you're not treated as a human being, and we're still not there. As we talk about all these state legislatures attacking people. So to fight that alone, and then to have this extra burden of your identity question, it was really hard. My parents knew nothing about being trans. I was blessed with two wonderful parents that just loved me, but it was still a navigation, a huge navigation, because that was just icky to me. It didn't fit my body, and I had nobody to talk to that about. My mother knew enough to navigate a girl through that, but not a trans child through that. And I see in the future, although that's being obliterated by all the work that the ground has been laid for, that trans children now have it just as difficult. because we've taken that, and you said that, Danielle, at the beginning, the 2 steps back, when we take 1 step forward and 3 steps back, that these children that were on blockers to prevent this type of activity are no longer on blockers. And this is a lifelong impact. I mean, I haven't had a period in bazillions of years, but the trauma of all of it, and then me trying to hide that, navigate that, has been a lifelong impact for me, due to the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain, the trauma, not having anybody, having the old school doctors that I had say, oh, it's just a natural process, and not understanding that I'm a trans child, which they knew nothing about at my age, you know, because there's only Christine Jurgensen. And then, you know, people like me never made the visibility. And that goes back to somebody on here said, and I probably was Dr. Chambers, the lack of research. And there's still a lack of research, particularly when it comes to trans masculine and non-binary people. Most of the research, as we know, is done on men. Men translate into society to trans women, and there's more research done on them. So we don't know what's happening to our bodies or what's done and how these things can be controlled or talked about, but we're not going to know during this hate bash. And I don't know whether it was Kay or Jennifer who said earlier, trying to string all the pieces together that impact this, but the hatred of, you know, you having to live those days, that became more than just 5 days a month for me, because I had such severe symptoms. It was like I was lucky if I had 5 days of freedom during the month. So it's devastating. It's devastating that you have nobody to talk to. Providers are not up to speed. They still aren't up to speed. They're getting better. But then we have this backlash. And now we have people just trying to get primary care again, when we had just gotten to a place of getting people primary care. And this, and, you know, and I look at the poor children in India, and, you know, I've done my background on this group, and I think that's great. But that same impact impacts trans children. And when you talk to them, their only solution is suicide. It's statistically proven, and it's anecdotally proven, because when I could get back on my feet and just go talk to them, their answer is suicide. And I get it, because I was in those same mental places, but I thought because that was years ago and we'd make years of improvement, well, I need to live several lifetimes for that, I guess. But that's my point. And so there's work that needs to be done around that. I do not trust, and I know that's Jennifer that said that, the state level to do that work. And we're going to be in a big bind come 2024, when we don't have a federal administration that believes in this work for trans people, if it goes out the door, and we see how things are looking. So
I'm going to pause right there just to remind everyone, if you have questions for these esteemed panelists, to please submit them. And I have a few more minutes of prepared questions here, but then we will bring in the questions from the audience as well. So thank you for submitting questions. I want to take what Kylar, you were just saying, and add that I hope that perhaps representation in the media can help some young people who are struggling. And so, Kay, I wanted to ask you, you know, is media representation getting better in your world? How do you and your colleagues, you know, plan to increase representation of this topic amongst, you know, trans people, non-binary people, young bleeders, perhaps as a counter to everything that's going on in government?
Yeah, before I answer that, I wanted to just add to a personal story from what everyone else is saying. And I really, Kylar, I feel so much for you when you tell your story. I was raised Catholic, and so tampons was not something that was allowed, right? Because it was as if you were losing your virginity. And I just realized this like yesterday when I was preparing for this panel, that I don't think I had to be taught by my college roommate how to use a tampon, and or even, you know, had a tampon. And I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. So I played volleyball where we wore bun huggers. And I was just thinking about like, I don't know if I was made fun of or if people could see or anything like that. Like if I had a nickname like Padsy or Bulgy or something. Like I don't know, but I do know that you know, the stuff that my mother told me was you'll use pads. And she was, you know, I had an older sister. I'm one of 7, so I have 4 brothers, but I have an older sister who went through it before me, obviously, and a younger sister. And so it was readily available to us. But I remember my mom saying, no, don't show it. Like, keep it hidden. Keep pads hidden. Like, keep them in your closet. Make sure that, you know, your brothers don't have to see it or something. And she's a product of how she was raised, and I'm a product of how I was raised. So in my house, we got tampons and pads everywhere in every bathroom. We talk about it all the time. You know, I have a daughter who's 9, you know, she is already knows what's up. So again, we're a product of how we are raised. And I think to what you said, Jennifer, I'm really struck by what you said of ignorance on top of bad intentions. That really has stayed with me. And I think in media and entertainment, I think it actually is getting better. I think that, like you pointed it out, Danielle, I was going to bring up, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, being not only, you know, so instrumental to so many leaders' lives, that book was, but it's also an amazing movie. Like, it's a really great movie that that is touching a lot of hearts. And that it was theatrically released and not on streaming was another big win for us in the entertainment department. And there's lots of independent movies specifically that I can think of off the top of my head, that are dramas that are written and told by, that happen to be written and told by women, that are so accurate and so most tell like gut-wrenchingly you know, symbolic and accurate depictions of what it's like. I'm forgetting the name of the movie because it was like Something Somewhere Always Never. I'm forgetting what it was, but it was about like the struggle of getting an abortion for a teenager. And it was just so accurate. So I think it's getting better. I think the more that there are women and non-binary and, you know, people telling these stories and not men who think they know, going back to ignorance on top of bad intentions, like particular thinking creatives that don't even necessarily know how to write for women or anything other than themselves. And so the more that we can get different voices out there representing us, again, it all comes down to representation and education. And then I don't know if you saw this, but there was a post, Dr. Chambers, to what you were saying about getting boys involved. Like I know it right there. I just felt like I'm man bashing, but in some ways I am, and I'm certainly man bashing McLean, but who's the person who was so ignorant. But there was a post about her daughter started her period on the bus ride home. Have you guys seen that? Today, and a boy a year older than her that she doesn't really know pulled her aside and whispered in her ear that she had a stain on the back of her pants, and gave her his sweater to tie around her waist so she could walk home off the bus. She said she was kind of embarrassed and originally said, "Oh, it's okay," but the boy insisted and told her, "I have sisters, it's all good." And basically this woman was like, if you are this boy's mom, I want to say thank you and that you are raising him right. So but really it's just like, can we make it so those of us who don't bleed don't think we sit in a river for 3 to 5 days and come out and can be productive members of society.
You're so right, Kate. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this great, I think it's technically on TikTok, but I'm old, so I watch TikTok videos on Instagram. And so it's bros versus like Roe versus bro. And it's these questions where they ask what seems to be pretty simple questions of people on the street, about the anatomy of bleeders. And, they're really simple questions like, how many tampons do you think is used in a cycle? And there was one answer that was 100 and another answer that was 1. And one of my favorite examples of this ever is when the first female astronaut went into space. Apparently they packed her and it was like a 1-month expedition, and they packed her like 150 tampons or like some like absurd number of tampons. And it was just kind of like, wow, like we really aren't communicating, or when we're still having conversations on the news, and when it's actually acceptable for multiple news anchors across multiple channels, across all spectrums, to literally sit and pontificate about whether a president that bleeds is capable of having nuclear codes. I mean, this is absolutely where we are still at in the society. And that is why, media representation and that conversation is so critical.
Mega, I want to ask you to continue there, when you're talking about this conversation. I think it's a great opportunity to tell us a little bit more about Pledge Your Period, because that really is all about being open about bleeding, and why you started this campaign and why you believe that campaigns where bleeding is normalized are important, and then specifically how everyone on this call can participate in the campaign after this conversation is over.
Yeah, I'll be really short. I definitely want Dr. Chambers to chime in on kind of the one thing that she wishes everyone knew about menstruation. I think it'd be as a doctor, as like kind of what it is that you see, but it kind of ties into what we're doing here at Pledge Your Period. So Pledge Your Period is really a simple campaign where you can just make it your own. We have templates online if you want to use them, but our pledgers have a lot of fun with them. We have friends that make full-on skits. In fact, one of my friends who grew up very similar to me, her name is Shumi Brody. She's a big TikTok star. And she did this great sketch where she was comparing what it was like when we were raised to what it was like when her kids are being raised in terms of our parental conversations around menstruation. We have other folks that tell their first period story. We have other folks that are sharing kind of what it is that they hope to see for the next generation, which is what the theme is this year of our campaign. And really, it's a social media campaign. You can donate to the cause, which goes directly to the work on the ground in India. You can visit pledgeyourperiod.com and attend an event and see where we might be in a city near you. We're doing a partnership with Kendra Scott, and so we might be in a city near you. And our pledges relate to donations. So the more people pledge, an incredible company, skincare company called Renavat, will be matching our donations, matching your pledges with dollars and donations. So, even the social media campaign can really make a difference. And at the end of the day, we believe that, it was said here in kind of very multiple ways, which I love that everyone kind of said it in the way that connected to their vertical, which is silence is dangerous. And when we aren't educated about our own bodies and in the bodies that we are surrounded by, we don't do service to anyone. And it's 2023. We should not be combating these natural things. We have bigger fish to fry. Like, don't get me wrong. I menstrual equity has become my life, but it'd be wonderful if we could move on from dealing with this issue, because there are a lot of other things that we want to focus on in terms of community and equity and financial development. But I really hope that if everyone just takes one action from this, it's start a conversation with 5 people this week that you don't think talk about menstruation. And just start that conversation, just start talking about it. And I think we'll all be surprised about what people know, what people don't know, what people want to know, and what people are scared of. And so I'll just pause there. But yeah, Dr. Chambers.
I think I'm having like too much fun on this panel, but like it's just I love like joining with people who are like on the same team. So to your point, kind of the thing that I wish would change about the whole period conversation, we would have a much easier time if we could remove periods and just that normal process from hypersexualization and adultification. I mean, huge. It would make the conversation so much easier because we could call it what it is. People who have their first periods are children. It is a part of childhood. Adults don't go through puberty, children do. So that is the entire counter argument to the don't say period crap, where they're saying we must start in 6th grade, right?
I jump in with a response to that. That's been very interesting to me. So there's been this very quick downward spiral of the political discourse around periods. Like I said, that sort of didn't exist until, at least in legislative debate, until recently. And I really feel like there is there's an actual agenda. I feel that there's literally been a memo sent around to right-wing operatives to counter this work. It's not paranoia, it's what they do. But interestingly, and I have this experience where after writing this piece in Time Magazine about the Florida bill, I was invited to go on the Florida local NPR station. And they said it was a live show and I was going to get questions. And I went into it a little swaggery. I'm like, it's NPR. What are these questions going to be? And in real time, across the country, in Idaho, a period products bill was actually killed. And just a regular, not education, not even sort of tapping into some of the boogeymen that they're looking for. This was a standard run-of-the-mill free period products in classrooms or in school restrooms. And the legislators themselves, white female Republicans, said, these are the words they use. This is too woke. This is too liberal. This is a nanny state. This is embarrassing. It's embarrassing to be talking about periods at all. Okay, so it ricocheted over to Idaho, right? Now I'm back on this Florida NPR station. We had gone from the Florida bill, sex ed bill, to the Idaho period products bill. Now it's like a day later. And the callers on the NPR show were not only repeating the same language that was coming out of Idaho. A very specific question that was asked to me is, why are you so obsessed with sexualizing children that you want to talk about this? So they turned that right on to me and said that was the problem. So just
and
placing there.
Right. And that is the issue. It is not a sexualizing process. It doesn't speak to gender identity, gender expression, heterosexuality, romantic. It doesn't speak to any of this. Your body does not.
You think blowing your nose might speak to
at all. And so to counter those, you have to appeal to science. What I know is I have seen children who have, XX and XY chromosomes that look phenotypically female. But they can tell us, and they are the only source that can tell us who they feel they are, who they are as a gender, and who their identity truly is. There's not another soul in the world of the smartest, the highest trained physicians. We've got endocrinologists, gynecologists, urologists, all of these people in a room, and we cannot decide because it is not up for us to decide. So if we can remove that from the conversation, we are not trying to tell you who to sleep with or who to look like or who you are. We are telling you about a normal process. All of this stuff can get dealt with because it is a normal process for people who have these parts. If we're talking in parts, it is just very easy. And so that is what I try to break it down to the parts. If you have the ability to have a period, I'm talking to you. That is why I chose the name The Period Doctor, because I wanted there to be no confusion on what I'm doing and who I'm serving. If you can have a period, if you know someone who's had a period, I can help you, or that you are aligned with my goals. It is the hypersexualization, adultification, and then the politicizing of these conversations that is holding us back. And if we can just acknowledge that and get back down to the actual basic natural science of it all, the conversation and the education should flow freely. It is not difficult. It is being made difficult by all of these crazy agendas, ignorance, and terrible intentions.
And
Excellent.
I know, but I just want to ask Dr. Chambers, and just to clarify something you said, great answer, by the way, but I don't want people to also go to trans issues and say, well, this is sexualization of children, because I think that
they are
extrapolate from your answer, because you said the menstruation isn't, and I want to make sure people are not saying, oh, but she didn't say the trans issue isn't, and so I want to make sure that you clarify that.
Very good point. Very good point.
It's not about sex, and they make everything about sex or grooming people or whatever, and all people are trying to do is deal with themselves and find themselves.
And I've spoken with an 11-year-old who was like, I just don't feel like a girl. That was it. Had nothing to do with any future partner, any romantic ideas. It was like who I am genuinely in my heart. That does not describe me. And so then the question should only be, well, then what does? And how can we support you and love you? Because the truth of the matter is, this is a matter of life and death. That is why I say to parents all the time, you may not understand what your child is saying, but you do understand that you want them to be alive tomorrow. So let's talk about what science says. If you just ignore their pronouns, they're more likely to kill themselves. The suicidality increases. If you ignore who they are, if you don't use their chosen name, these things that reaffirm who a person is. And when people try to minimize that, they say, oh, pronouns don't matter. All you have to do is read their bio and switch out all the pronouns, misgender them, and see how mad they get. See how erased they feel. See how lost they feel. It is real. Everyone wants to be seen for who they are. And when you can do that and separate the two, this is who I am. And then this is our science and period. Like, they don't have to be so crazily counterbalanced. You still need to see a person as the full person. But if you cannot, I beg of you to just break it down to the parts. If your brain is not complex enough to see them for who they are and understand their lived experience and honor that, just honor the parts and you won't be lost.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chambers. We've received some really excellent questions from the audience as well. And I think this segues into one of them. Kylar, one of our audience members, wants to know, what is something you would tell a young person who is struggling with navigating their identity and menstruation?
I have these talks daily, and I would tell them to, one, make sure they have a posse, a group that supports them, getting professionals involved in that group, make sure they have personal, if their family doesn't accept them, there are plenty of people that will, and I hook them up with resources that do, and I'm their first resource. I'm there for that call. My number is known worldwide, and I'll take that call any time of day. I will admit I'm a little bit older now, so I may not wake up in the evening time anymore for the call, but leave me that message and I will get to you, and we will find you the resources and the support you need. You are worthy of love. You belong here.
Thank you for that. Yes, worthy of love. Leading on from that, this question is for anyone on the panel. I think I'll address it perhaps to Dr. Chambers first, and then if anyone else wants to join in. What's the best way to include all genders in the menstruation conversation? I think you spoke a bit to it with your honor the parts, but if you have any more specifics.
So including all genders is really just acknowledging the role that everyone plays. If you're a parent and your job is to protect your child, protection includes understanding menstruation. If a child is left with their father for the weekend or the summer, you still need to be able to know, are they safe? Is this okay? Is this normal? Is this healthy? And so being aware of what's occurring in their body and what's normal. If they're bleeding for a month straight, you don't need to call their mom or some other female to say, is this normal? It's your job to know that it's normal or not. Or that, they shouldn't be sleeping for 36 hours. They shouldn't be skipping 6 meals. they're normal tenets of being a good person and a parent that you should be leaning on. The other thing is, I mean, I try to remove a lot of the gendered kind of roles in my language. So I'm talking about menstruators. I'm talking about people with periods. And that just says, I care about you too. I've had people try to correct my language on posts that I've done saying, oh, you didn't mean menstruators. You meant to say, why didn't you just say women? Because I didn't mean women. First of all, this 12-year-old girl doesn't think she's a woman. Even, we're not even talking about, any type of gender confusion necessarily, or gender fluidity or anything of that nature. It's just, I am 12 and I don't believe that I am a woman right now, right? Or I'm non-binary and that does not describe me. So creating inclusive language, and it's not hard. It's actually just better. It's like saying, oh, the parents come to pick up their kids, because it's not just moms that come to pick up their kids, the students, because it's not just a bunch of little girls in the classroom. It is the most inclusive language, and just making that second nature. It is not hard. Menstruators, people with periods, that says, I care about you. And the people who are included in that often don't even notice it. They're like, okay, I know I have a period. It's not a hard thing to do, but it's something to say, I see you. For me as a physician, I changed my intake paperwork. I said, tell me your name, tell me your chosen name, tell me, your pronouns. And I had parents get upset with me for having that. A grandmother got so upset and said, don't be asking my granddaughter her pronouns. I was like, first of all, you already gave me the answer. You said her, but it's fine. But for that 11-year-old that came in and said, I knew you'd be a good doctor because you asked these questions. That is what I care about. That child didn't even feel that she was gender fluid, but she knew many, many people in her classroom that were. So the kids know that you are caring or not. And by even just using language that includes them in the conversation, you create space for that conversation to occur. And so it's not hard, but inclusion is not just removing barriers. It is calling people in, it is sending invitations and helping them into that space, right? And so it's one of those things where folks will say, well, you could have always come. Did you invite me? Did you make me feel welcome? That is the difference. And the onus is on physicians as well.
Thank you so much for that inclusive language. I think that would help across all aspects of society. I'd love, Mega, to ask you to chime in quickly on where do you think, and I think probably just the Desai Foundation is one of the places, but where can people get accurate menstrual information in areas where their menstrual health education is lacking?
I'm going to answer that question slightly differently, but yes, I think that from a medical perspective, definitely consult doctors. I am not a doctor. I would follow people like Dr. Chambers, and some other medical professionals when it comes to medical advice. I think when it comes to discussions around menstruation in schools, I think school nurses are a great resource. I also think, even if you think that your parent is going to be uncomfortable, ask them the question. I think that if you are curious about something, asking the question never hurts. I think at the Desai Foundation, we go out into the rural villages and educate, and we do it in schools. We do it in both for all genders. We do it in schools. So we started at a very young age, educating all genders about menstrual equity and health in schools. I would also continue to follow what's happening in your state. Jennifer's work is really important. That spans the nation of the United States in terms of what's happening across every state. You want to know what the laws are, where they're headed in your district and in your state. There are also dozens of organizations that work with all different aspects of menstrual equity. At the Desai Foundation, we impact a 360 view, so health, livelihood, around education, awareness, distribution, and shame and stigma. The area that we don't do is policy. So for that, I would definitely look at what Jennifer's doing. And there are organizations that focus here in the US, I Support Girls. There's a couple of organizations that are global and nationwide. There's a great organization called the PAD Project that does both local here in the US and global advocacy around menstrual work. So everyone has a different approach to menstrual equity. And I think that they're all good. At the end of the day, what we do is we experiment and we see what works. For example, there's a massive debate right now in India, but also in other areas around reusable versus single-use products, right? On one hand, you want to use a reusable product for the environment. On the other hand, if you're in a location that doesn't have running water and doesn't have soap, it's actually really dangerous to use a reusable product. And so we often get into debates with organizations that are like, oh, well, we only fund, sustainable programs. I'm like, well, the sustainability that I'm promoting is the life of a woman or the life of a young bleeder. And so it is an interesting, there's a lot of rich nuance in the conversation itself. There's a big movement here in the US around using cups and around using, organic products versus non-organic products. I think that everyone's voice elevates the conversation. And so I just kind of encourage to continue having these nuanced debates, continue, taking a look at these different types of organizations. And if you're interested in supporting us, visit the DesaiFoundation.org.
Thank you. On that policy piece, Jennifer, if in these last couple of minutes, if someone is really excited by this conversation and wants to do something in their community around menstrual equity, where would you point them?
So the exciting thing I think about this policy agenda is it really has, sort of captured the energy and excitement and engagement of people all around the country and all around the world. When I first started thinking about these issues as policy and political matters back in 2015, it almost didn't exist. It's a very different experience now. So, and from my perspective, actually, I don't even do much on the ground in terms of advocacy. I sit in an office in New York City and sort of write a lot and think of big ideas, but I really think it's important that people are doing this in their own communities where they know, what people need, how they're talking about it. How even just the mechanics of working with leaders, whether it's local leaders or state leaders, it looks very different across the country. So there are organizations that are now, sort of funded organizations that take on this work and have chapters and infrastructure that people can plug into. So I'm not really, I guess, here to tout any particular organization, and I don't have personal, necessarily preferences. So I think folks should very quick Google search will yield everything from national organizations with chapters to local folks organizing in their own communities, in their own school districts, as well as advice about how to do it yourself if there's not something to plug into going on, if you're a student in school or if you're somebody who's thinking about the public facilities in your town or community or municipality. I want them in my public library. I want them in my public park. I want them in the public benefits office here. So I would say that Google can be your friend here. There's a lot of cool organizing going on around the country. So there's no need to recreate the wheel for anyone and lots of opportunities to plug in.
I love that. Jen, just real quick, you touched on something so important. Not only can you research what people are doing, you can also change what people are doing. So, there is a beautifully slow movement across the country that's happening right now that's encouraging food banks to supply menstrual products. So I know for a fact that the New York Food Bank supplies menstrual products. I know that the food bank in Boston supplies menstrual products. So, maybe call your local food bank and ask them if they're supplying menstrual products to those that are kind of, food insecure. Because if they're food insecure, they might be menstrual product insecure. And so, be suffering from period poverty. So, I'm just kind of underlining exactly what Jen's talking about in terms of there are a lot of different ways to engage in this fight.
Well, I think that's probably where we have to wrap. Unfortunately, there were other questions that wanted to get to, and we are out of time today, but I just want to thank everyone for the insight and the expertise and the compassion and the empathy that they shared during this panel. And it was wonderful to be a part of it. And I learned a lot, and I am sure that everyone else watching learned a lot. And thank you so much for having me be a part of it, Mega. And if there's anything you'd like to say to close, I'll pass it back to you.
No, I really want to shout out and thank you to these incredible esteemed panelists. They're people that I look up to, and maybe tweet the question to them. Maybe they'll answer. And so, keep us engaged and do take the pledge at pledgeyourperiod.com. And thank you for everyone that tuned in. Here are some slides on how you can pledge your period. And so, we encourage you to take the pledge. But again, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to these incredible panelists, Kylar, Kay, Jennifer, Danielle, and Dr. Chambers. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here to share so much valuable information and have such a fun debate and conversation. Loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.